I was 35 minutes from home when my phone told me somebody was moving inside my cabin. Not outside by the porch, not near the shed, but inside the main room and then inside the radio bay. 3 alerts in less than 20 seconds. I pulled onto the shoulder, opened the security feed, and there she was, standing in the middle of my private cabin with a tape measure in one hand and the confidence of a woman who had never once considered the possibility that the room might be recording her. Her name was Marlene Voss, president of the neighboring Cedar Hollow Property Association, and for nearly 6 years she had been trying to find some legal excuse to reach across the boundary line and put her hands on land that had never belonged to her. My name is Dean Mercer. I am 54 years old, and before I retired I spent 22 years designing industrial control systems, the kind that keep power stations, pumping facilities, and manufacturing plants from turning into very expensive bonfires. So when I say I built my own security system, I do not mean I bought 4 cameras from a big box store and hoped the Wi-Fi held up. I mean I designed the wiring, programmed the sensors, built the battery redundancy, and set the whole thing to archive off-site the second movement was detected. I had purchased 16 acres outside Red Bluff, Wyoming, in 2018, a rough piece of high prairie bordered by pine, rock, and a development full of oversized houses called Cedar Hollow Reserve. Their association governs 68 homes, private roads, landscaping rules, mailbox paint, all the usual little kingdoms people build when they have too much time and access to a printer. My land was separate, always had been, with its own deed, its own parcel number, its own access road, and no covenant tying it to Cedar Hollow. I had checked that fact 3 times before closing because I had lived under an association once in Colorado, and after receiving a warning for leaving a canoe visible behind my own garage, I decided one lifetime was enough. The cabin sat near the northern edge of the property, about half a mile from the main house, 980 square feet of timber, steel roofing, solar power, rain catchment, and quiet. I built it over 2 summers with my old Army friend Mason Pike, who had worked commercial carpentry until his back retired before he did. The cabin had a sleeping loft, a propane stove, a wood burner, and a communications room where I kept my amateur radio equipment, emergency receivers, battery monitors, and several custom control units I'd built by hand. The equipment was worth close to $45,000, but the money was not the reason I cared about it. After my wife Claire died from ovarian cancer in 2020, that cabin became the one place where grief did not feel like something chasing me from room to room. I could sit there at midnight, tune across the bands, hear a farmer in Nebraska talking about storms, or a retired teacher in Oregon testing a new antenna, and for a little while the world felt wide enough to breathe in again. I installed the cameras after finding boot prints near the back window one January morning. 8 exterior cameras, 2 inside, audio at every entrance, door sensors, pressure strips beneath the porch, and a silent upload system powered by a separate solar bank. Marlene did not know any of that. She had moved into Cedar Hollow in late 2021, a former luxury home broker from Scottsdale with silver blonde hair, sharp red glasses, and the habit of dressing for a board meeting even when she was standing beside a barbecue grill. Within 5 months, she ran for association president on a slogan that sounded like it had been printed on a scented candle, protecting the character we paid for. She won with 13 votes, 13 out of 52 eligible households. By the next spring, she had replaced the grounds contractor, created a visual standards committee, and issued notices about driveway gravel, outdoor lights, firewood stacking, and what she called seasonal porch clutter, which apparently meant a plastic snow shovel left beside a door in February. My neighbor, Elias Rudd, owned 20 acres west of me and attended association meetings mostly for entertainment. He told me about Marlene the way a rancher tells you a bull has started testing fences. She asks about your land, he said one afternoon, leaning on my truck. Says your cabin affects the neighborhood view corridor. I laughed because from the nearest Cedar Hollow house, the cabin looked like a brown postage stamp between 2 ridges. I told Elias she was welcome to admire the view from her side of the property line. That turned out to be optimistic. On the day of the break-in, I had driven into Red Bluff for electrical fittings and a replacement charge controller. At 2018 in the afternoon, the first interior alert hit my phone, then another, then the radio room. I opened the live feed and saw Marlene with 2 association officers, a thick-necked man named Brent Holloway and a younger woman named Kira Sloan, who carried a clipboard like it was a badge. The exterior camera showed them approach from the East Trail, which meant they had crossed my boundary fence despite the private property signs. Marlene knocked once, waited maybe 5 seconds, then tried the handle. When it did not open, she walked around the side of the cabin and tested the kitchen window. The lower latch had been sticking in cold weather, something I had planned to fix that weekend. Brent pushed the frame upward while Marlene held it. He climbed in, unlocked the front door, and the three of them entered with the relaxed efficiency of people touring a house before making an offer. I watched from my truck in the parking lot of a plumbing supply store, one hand on the steering wheel, the other holding my phone. For 43 minutes, they moved through the cabin. Kira wrote down dimensions. Brent photographed the battery cabinet, the radio desk, the wall panels, even the serial plates on 2 transceivers. Marlene opened drawers, lifted a framed photo of Claire, looked at it, and set it face down on the table. That was the moment something inside me changed. Before that, I was angry in the clean, technical way a man gets angry when somebody damages equipment. When she placed my wife's picture face down, it became personal. Then, she stood in the radio room, stretched a tape measure across the workbench, and said, clear enough for the ceiling microphone to catch every word, this wall could come out, and the whole back section could become a guest suite. Kira asked for association use. Marlene smiled and said, eventually. That one word sat in the air like smoke. Before leaving, they taped a notice to the door declaring that the cabin had undergone an exterior impact and safety inspection under Cedar Hollow's Neighborhood Preservation Authority. The notice cited Rule 12C, accessory structures within the community influence perimeter. I had never heard of Rule 12C because it did not exist in any document attached to my property. They walked back toward the development, believing they had completed some clever little administrative maneuver. I stayed in my truck for several minutes after the feed went quiet. The sun was bright on the windshield. A delivery forklift beeped somewhere behind me, and a man in a red cap pushed a cart past my hood without realizing that, 3 feet away, I was deciding how much of someone's life could be dismantled using nothing but patience, records, and their own recorded voice. I did not call Marlene. I did not drive straight to the cabin. I went home, made coffee, opened the archive on my desktop, and watched all 43 minutes twice. Then I created a spreadsheet with columns for timestamp, person, action, location, object handled in spoken words. By midnight, I had logged every drawer they opened, every piece of equipment they touched, every photograph they took, and every sentence they said. At 12:47 a.m., I added one final note beside Marlene's comment about the guest suite, possible motive beyond association enforcement. The next morning, I drove to the cabin, photographed the scratched window frame, the mark beside the lock, the shifted receivers, and Claire's picture still lying face down where Marlene had left it. I stood there for a long moment, then turned the frame upright and said, quietly, you always told me not to underestimate mean people with stationery. Claire would have appreciated that line. Then I drove into town, walked into the county records office, and asked the clerk to pull every recorded document connected to Cedar Hollow Reserve, including amendments, plats, meeting filings, and boundary changes. What she placed on the counter an hour later was not just proof that Marlene had no authority over my land. It was the first loose thread in a scheme she had been weaving for years. The first document that caught my attention was labeled Resolution 9F, Community View Protection and Adjacent Land Compatibility, adopted 11 months after Marlene became president. It claimed Cedar Hollow had the right to inspect any structure within 1,500 feet of the subdivision if that structure could be seen from a common road, walking trail, or private residence, which was an impressive sentence in the same way a counterfeit $100 bill is impressive. Detailed enough to fool you until you hold it up to the light. The resolution carried 4 signatures, Marlene's, Brent Holloway's, Kira Sloan's, and one from a board secretary named Nolan Price, but the original covenanters required approval from 2/3 of the property owners before the association could expand its authority, and even then it could only govern property already bound to the covenanters. My land was not bound to anything except county regulations and the occasional bad decision involving power tools. I photographed every page, ordered certified copies, then asked the clerk whether any boundary expansion or annexation agreement had ever been recorded against my parcel. She searched twice and shook her head. No annexation, no easement, no membership agreement, nothing. On my way out, she said, "You look like somebody who just found what he came for." I told her I found more than I wanted. That afternoon, I called a property attorney named Adrian Cole, a 63-year-old man in Cheyenne who had spent most of his career handling ranch boundaries, easement fights, and association disputes. Elias had used him years earlier when Cedar Hollow tried to claim a drainage corridor across his pasture, and his recommendation was simple. Adrian does not raise his voice because the documents usually do it for him. I liked that. 2 days later, I sat across from Adrian in an office that smelled faintly of coffee and old leather, with my laptop open and 3 certified folders arranged between us. He watched 12 minutes of the footage without interrupting. Though when Marlene turned Claire's photograph face down, his jaw tightened slightly. When the clip ended, he took off his glasses and said, "They broke into your cabin." I said, "That was my professional assessment too." He almost smiled, then asked to see Resolution 9F. He read it once, flipped back to the signature page, then opened the original covenanters and checked the amendment procedure. "This is not an amendment," he said. "It is a board resolution pretending to be one. 4 officers cannot create jurisdiction over property they do not own, do not govern, and have never been invited onto. Even if every homeowner in Cedar Hollow voted for it, they still could not regulate your parcel. They can vote that the moon owes them landscaping fees, but the moon does not have to pay." I asked what the break-in meant legally. Adrian said the clearest issue was criminal trespass, possibly burglary depending on how the county attorney viewed their intent once inside, though he cautioned that prosecutors were often conservative when no property appeared to be stolen. Civilly, the case was stronger and broader. Trespass, invasion of privacy, property damage, interference with my lawful use of the cabin, and potentially conversion if they copied or retained information from my radio logs or equipment records. Then he leaned back and asked a question I had not expected. "Why your cabin?" I told him Marlene claimed it affected the neighborhood view. Adrian looked at the photographs of my land, then at a county map showing the cabin nearly half a mile from the nearest Cedar Hollow home. "That explanation is nonsense," he said. "So what does she actually want?" I played the audio again. This wall could come out. The whole back section could become a guest suite. Eventually, Adrian listened twice. Then he asked permission to run a full title and transaction search on my parcel, including prior offers and development proposals. I agreed. Before I left, it drafted a preservation letter ordering Cedar Hollow, Marlene, Brent, and Kira to retain all emails, text messages, photographs, meeting notes, inspection records, and communications concerning my property. He also sent a formal notice that I was not a member of the association, that Cedar Hollow had no authority over my land, and that any further entry would be treated as knowing trespass. Marlene answered 8 days later through an attorney named Victor Wren, a small-town general practitioner whose website advertised divorces, wills, DUIs, and HOA representation beneath the same smiling photograph. His letter did not apologize. It claimed the visit had been a lawful administrative inspection conducted under Resolution 9F, argued that my lack of prior objection amounted to implied acceptance of Cedar Hollow's neighborhood standards, and demanded that I sign an access agreement allowing inspections every 6 months. At the bottom, it warned that refusal could result in legal action to protect property values. I read the letter at my kitchen table, then called Adrian. He answered on the second ring. I said, "They want me to sign permission after the fact." He said, "Excellent." I asked if he had misheard me. "No, Dean, this is excellent. They have now placed their invented authority in writing, demanded future access, and threatened litigation against land outside their jurisdiction. A foolish act becomes much more useful when somebody repeats it on law firm letterhead." He told me not to respond personally and asked for 48 hours. The next afternoon, Adrian called while I was replacing a fence brace near the south pasture. His voice had the controlled energy of a man who had found the missing page in a mystery. He asked whether I remembered the name of the family trust that owned my acreage before I bought it. I did, the Barrett Family Conservation Trust. He said the trust had acquired the land in 2016 after the original owner died, then listed it for sale in 2018. There have been 3 serious offers. Mine was not one of them, because I bought later, after the first sale collapsed. One offer came from a ranching couple near Casper. Another came from a renewable energy company interested in a small testing site. The third came from Marlene Elise Foss, then living in Arizona. through a limited liability company called Boss Ridge Holdings. Her offer was lower than the others but included a proposal to divide the northern section into 6 luxury vacation parcels, using what was now my cabin access road as the central drive. The trust rejected her proposal because it conflicted with conservation restrictions under consideration. 2 years later, those restrictions were reduced, the land returned to market, and I bought it. I sat down on the fence rail. So she tried to develop this land before she ever moved here. Correct, Adrian said. And after she failed, she bought a house next door, became association president, invented a view protection rule, and entered your cabin while discussing conversion. That is no longer random overreach. That looks like a pattern. Suddenly, the tape measure made sense. The photographs, the dimensions, the comments about a guest suite. Marlene had not been checking whether my roof matched Cedar Hollow's preferred color palette. She was evaluating a building she had once imagined as part of her own development. Adrian's title researcher found more. During Marlene's first year as president, Cedar Hollow's newsletters began mentioning future community amenities on adjacent acreage, including walking trails, a retreat lodge, and an emergency gathering space. No parcel was named, but one crude map published in a planning summary showed a shaded area that overlapped the northern corner of my property. The map was labeled Conceptual Expansion Zone. I had never seen it because I did not receive HOA newsletters. Elias had copies in a plastic storage bin in his garage, along with fishing tackle, extension cords, and what looked like every utility bill he had paid since 1994. We spent an evening sorting through them at his kitchen table. By midnight, we had 18 references to adjacent land coordination, external visual authority, future amenity access, and long-term community integration. Marlene had been preparing the residents to believe Cedar Hollow would eventually absorb or control land beyond its borders. Elias tapped one newsletter and said she was selling them a future she did not own. I said, some people call that vision. He said, in Wyoming we usually call it trespassing. Adrian advised me to authenticate the footage before Marlene could claim it was edited. I hired a digital forensics company in Laramie, gave them the original encrypted files, server logs, camera firmware records, and storage history, and paid $2,300 for a full chain of custody report. They confirmed the timestamps, verified that no frames had been altered, and produced court-ready copies with matching cryptographic hashes. I also inventoried every radio component they touched and contacted a communications attorney in Denver named Lena Ortiz, who specialized in amateur radio and spectrum law. Lena watched the clips of Brent photographing serial plates and Kira opening my operating log. She told me the federal issue was not as simple as claiming that touching a radio automatically created an FCC violation, but unauthorized access to station records, possible interference, and any attempt to restrict a properly licensed station could draw federal attention, especially when combined with a false county complaint. Her caution made me trust her. Good attorneys do not promise thunder when the evidence only supports rain. We file a detailed complaint with the FCC Enforcement Bureau, documenting the forced entry, handling of equipment, access to technical logs, and Marlene's broader efforts to control the station site. At the same time, Adrian helped me file a criminal trespass complaint with the county sheriff. A detective named Rachel Boone came to the cabin, inspected the window damage, reviewed the property survey, and watched the footage in silence. When it ended, she said, they do understand that a homeowners association is not a law enforcement agency. Correct? I told her their attorney seemed uncertain. She took copies of everything and opened a formal investigation. Then Marlene made the mistake that moved the entire situation from a private legal dispute toward public collapse. She sent a newsletter to every Cedar Hollow household announcing that the association had completed a successful safety inspection of the Mercer outbuilding and was beginning preliminary discussions regarding future integration of the site into Cedar Hollow's emergency preparedness network. She described my cabin as underutilized adjacent infrastructure. Underutilized. I had slept there the previous weekend. I had spoken by radio with operators in 4 states, repaired a charge monitor, cooked chili, and spent an hour sitting on the porch listening to coyotes. But because Marlene did not control it, she considered it unused. Elias brought me the newsletter with a look I had seen on soldiers years ago, when somebody had just stepped on a clearly marked mine. Adrian read it and said, she has publicly announced an interest in taking functional control of your property. We are done warning her. We began preparing a civil complaint against Marlene. Brent, Kira, and Cedar Hollow itself. While Detective Boone interviewed board members and requested their internal communications, one of those board members, Nolan Price, called me late on a Sunday night. His voice was low and nervous. He said Marlene had told the board I was considering donating the cabin for community use, and that the inspection was merely a preliminary walkthrough. He had signed Resolution 9F because she described it as a harmless policy statement, not an expansion of legal authority. Then he said something that changed our timeline. The monthly association meeting was 12 days away, and Marlene planned to present architectural drawings showing my cabin converted into a Cedar Hollow emergency lodge, complete with a new access path crossing my land. I asked where the drawings came from. Nolan hesitated, then said, "From the measurements they took inside your cabin." I looked through the dark kitchen window toward the distant ridge, where the cabin sat beyond the trees, and for the first time since this began, I smiled. Marlene had taken my private room, my grief, my wife's photograph, and my silence as signs that I could be managed. But now she was preparing to display the evidence of her own motive in front of the entire neighborhood, and all I had to do was let her finish the presentation. For the next 12 days, I said nothing. Adrian filed the civil complaint under seal pending service. Detective Boone finished her interviews. Lena kept the FCC package moving, and I spent my evenings preparing a presentation so simple even Marlene could understand it. I did not want charts, speeches, or legal theater. I wanted sequence. Here is the boundary. Here is the fake resolution. Here is the window. Here is Marlene climbing through it. Here is the tape measure. Here are the plans she created from measurements taken during a crime. Nolan quietly sent us the meeting agenda. In item 6 read, Future Emergency Lodge and Community Expansion Opportunity. Marlene had given it a name before she had permission, which told me everything about how she saw the world. In her mind, ownership was just an obstacle between her and a better brochure. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening in Cedar Hollow's clubhouse, a stone-faced building with vaulted ceilings, fake antler chandeliers, and a fireplace nobody used because the insurance committee considered fire aesthetically unpredictable. About 50 residents showed up, more than usual, because Elias had told 3 people there might be an interesting discussion, and those 3 people apparently understood the ancient rural tradition of telling everybody. I arrived 10 minutes before the meeting with my laptop, certified records, the forensic report, and Claire's photograph wrapped in a towel inside my bag. Adrian sat near the back beside Detective Boone, who wore plain clothes and looked like someone waiting for a bus. Lena joined by video from Denver. Marlene stood at the front in a cream blazer, smiling beneath the screen displaying a polished architectural rendering of my cabin with larger windows, a stone patio, and the words Cedar Hollow Emergency Retreat. She had even added flower boxes. That detail irritated me more than it should have. The meeting began with landscaping updates, road maintenance, and a 15-minute argument about whether dark bronze counted as black under the new mailbox standard. Then Marlene moved to item 6. She spoke warmly about community resilience, shared resources, wildfire preparedness, and what she called an exciting opportunity to transform underused neighboring infrastructure into a space that could benefit everyone. She clicked through floor plans based on my cabin's exact measurements. My radio room had become a guest bedroom. My workbench had become a beverage counter. The wall where Claire's photograph hung was labeled Future Storage. Marlene said preliminary inspection had confirmed the building was suitable for conversion and that discussions with the owner were ongoing. I stood up. "No, they are not." The room turned toward me. Marlene's smile tightened. "Dean," she said, "this is a member's presentation." I said, "Then it is fortunate you are presenting my property to your members." A few people laughed before realizing she did not find it funny. I walked to the front and asked to connect my laptop. She refused. Adrian stood and introduced himself as my attorney, then informed the room that Cedar Hollow had been named in a civil action filed that morning. That changed the temperature. Marlene looked toward Victor Wren, who was sitting beside the board table and had suddenly become very interested in the complaint Adrian placed in front of him. Nolan stood and made a motion allowing me 10 minutes to respond. The motion passed by raised hands before Marlene could stop it. I connected the laptop. First, I showed the county plat with my 16 acres outlined beyond the Cedar Hollow boundary. Then I displayed the original covenanters and the 2/3 voting requirement. Beside them, I placed Resolution 9F with its 4 signatures. This document does not govern my land. I said. It was never approved by the membership, never recorded against my parcel, and could not create authority beyond the subdivision even if every person in this room signed it tonight. Then I played the exterior footage. Marlene crossing my fence, Brent forcing the window, the three of them entering. Nobody spoke. I played the interior footage next. Kira opening my station log, Brent photographing equipment, Marlene measuring the wall and saying it could become a guest suite. Then came the moment she turned Claire's photograph face down. I paused the video there. This was my wife, I said. She died 4 years ago. That cabin is where I learned how to sit with that loss without letting it swallow me. You did not inspect an outbuilding. You broke into the most private place I own, moved through it like buyers at an open house, and used what you stole to draw the plans behind me. The silence after that was heavier than anger. Marlene tried to speak, but I clicked to the next slide. Her 2018 development proposal through Voss Ridge Holdings, showing 6 luxury parcels across the exact section she was now calling a community opportunity. Elias muttered, "Well, there it is," loud enough for half the room to hear. I explained her failed attempt to acquire the land, the newsletters preparing residents for expansion, the fake authority, the break-in, and the public claim that I had agreed to donate the cabin. Then Adrian announced the claims against Marlene, Brent, Kira, and the association. Lena appeared on screen and confirmed that a federal complaint concerning access to licensed radio records had been submitted. Finally, Detective Boone walked forward, identified herself, and asked Marlene, Brent, and Kira to step outside regarding criminal trespass warrants. Brent went pale. Kira started crying before she stood. Marlene remained seated and said, "This is a misunderstanding." Detective Boone looked at the frozen image of Marlene holding the tape measure inside my cabin and replied, "It appears unusually well documented for a misunderstanding." That line followed her out of the room. By the end of the night, Nolan resigned from the board and released emails showing Marlene had described my land as Phase 2 for months. 2 other officers resigned before midnight. The members voted to suspend Resolution 9F, cancel every adjacent property initiative, and retain independent counsel. 4 months later, all 3 defendants accepted misdemeanor trespass pleas. Marlene received 18 months of probation, a substantial fine, and a no-contact order covering my entire parcel. The civil case settled for enough to cover repairs, legal fees, forensic work, and a new steel entry system, though the number mattered less than the written agreement stating Cedar Hollow had no present or future authority over my land. The FCC issued a formal warning concerning unauthorized access to station records, and the county rejected a last-minute complaint Marlene filed against my antenna as retaliatory and unsupported. Cedar Hollow replaced the board, hired professional management, and required member votes and outside legal review for every future covenant change. As for me, I restored the cabin exactly as it had been. The radio desk stayed a radio desk. Claire's photograph went back on the wall, this time in a frame bolted more securely than necessary. I added 2 cameras, fixed the window latch, and mounted a sign Elias carved by hand. It reads, "Private property, no entry. Bad ideas will be recorded." I still spend weekends there, talking to strangers over clean signals beneath a wide Wyoming sky, and sometimes I think about Marlene's plans with the flower boxes. She believed confidence could replace consent, paperwork could replace ownership, and silence meant surrender. She was wrong about all 3. But here is the part people still argue about. Some residents said I should have warned the association before letting the meeting happen, that public humiliation went too far even if the arrests were justified. Others said secrecy was exactly what allowed Marlene to build power in the first place, and the community needed to see everything at once. So tell me what you think. Would you have confronted her privately and given her one last chance? Or would you have done exactly what I did and let the footage speak in front of everyone? Leave your answer in the comments. Share this with anyone who has ever dealt with an HOA that forgot where its authority ended. And subscribe, because the next story begins with a bulldozer at sunrise and a property line nobody bothered to verify.